I remember the exact way the sunlight bent through the hospital blinds the day I was born, thin lines of pale gold stretching across the room with unnatural precision, as if even light followed a pattern I could trace. I remember the sterile smell settling into the back of my throat, sharp and metallic, and the distant clatter of instruments that made my body react before I even understood what fear was. I remember being held, the uneven rhythm of a heartbeat that wasn't mine, and the strange, overwhelming awareness that I existed inside a moment I would never lose. I remember everything, and I've always remembered everything, without effort, without gaps, without the mercy of forgetting. It isn't something I trained or learned. It has always been there, a constant, like breathing. My mind doesn't store fragments or summaries the way most people's does. It stores entire experiences, complete and untouched. If I choose a day from years ago, I don't recall it vaguely. I step back into it with full clarity, able to follow every second in sequence, hear every word exactly as it was spoken, and feel every detail as if it were happening again. Time, for me, doesn't blur or soften. It stacks, building a continuous, unbroken line of memory that defines who I am. When I was younger, people thought it was extraordinary. Teachers called it a gift. Doctors called it hyperthymesia. My parents called it a blessing because they didn't understand what it meant to carry everything with equal weight. It meant that nothing ever faded, not the good moments, and certainly not the bad ones. Every mistake, every embarrassment, every loss stayed as sharp as the moment it happened. Forgetting, I realized early on, is not a flaw in the human mind. It is a necessary function. Without it, the past doesn't stay behind you. It surrounds you. Despite that, I adapted. I built routines to manage the constant presence of memory, small habits that helped me stay grounded. Sometimes I would revisit random days just to confirm that everything was still there, still intact, still continuous. It became a quiet reassurance, proof that my mind was stable, that the structure I depended on hadn't changed. There were rules to how my memory worked, and those rules never failed. It was chronological, continuous, and complete. There were no jumps, no missing pieces, no empty spaces between moments. Until one evening, that stopped being true. It started with something so small that I almost ignored it. I was sitting at my desk, idly trying to remember what I had eaten a few nights earlier, tracing the day backward the way I always did. I woke up at 8:12 in the morning, checked my phone, brushed my teeth, and left my apartment at exactly 9:03. I remembered the faint chill in the hallway, the echo of my footsteps on the stairs, and the exact angle of sunlight hitting the pavement outside. Work unfolded in perfect detail, every sound and conversation exactly where it should be. Then I reached the evening, and there was nothing. It wasn't confusion or uncertainty. It wasn't that I couldn't recall the details. It was that there were no details to recall. One moment I was locking my office door, feeling the cool metal of the handle in my hand, and the next moment I was brushing my teeth before bed. There was no transition between those 2 points, no bridge connecting them. It felt like a section of my life had been removed with precision, leaving behind a clean and unnatural edge. I tried again, approaching the memory from different points, starting earlier, starting later, moving through the sequence in different ways. Every attempt ended at the same place, at the exact moment where everything simply stopped existing. At first, I told myself it was a mistake. Maybe I'd misaligned the date or confused it with another day. Even with my memory, I tried to believe an error was possible. But when I checked again the next day, the gap was still there, unchanged and absolute. That was the moment it became something else. My memory did not fail. It did not skip or leave holes. The absence of those hours wasn't just unusual. It was impossible. The continuity of my life had always been complete, and now, for the first time, it wasn't. That realization settled into me slowly, bringing with it a kind of unease I had never experienced before, because I'd never had reason to doubt my own mind. I began documenting everything after that. Every hour, I wrote down where I was, what I was doing, and what I was thinking. I recorded voice notes, set alarms, and forced myself to check in regularly, creating an external record to match what should have been stored internally. It felt excessive at first, almost paranoid, but it gave me a sense of control, something to hold on to in the absence of certainty. For a few days, nothing happened, and I almost convinced myself that it had been a one-time anomaly. Then, without warning, it happened again, and this time, I noticed it immediately. I was sitting on my couch, writing in my notebook, focused on finishing a sentence, when something shifted in a way that had no transition. 1 second I was writing, and the next I was still there, but the room was darker, the air felt heavier, and something was wrong. I checked the clock, and 2 hours had passed. My hand was still holding the pen, but the sentence I had been writing was gone, replaced by something else written in my own handwriting. The shape of the letters, the pressure of the pen, everything about it was undeniably mine, but I had no memory of writing it. That realization triggered a slow, rising panic, because it wasn't just a missing memory anymore. It was evidence that I had been active during that time, functioning, thinking, acting, and yet none of it existed for me. I grabbed my phone and checked the voice recording I had set. It was there, exactly where it should have been. My hands felt unsteady as I pressed play, bracing myself for something I couldn't predict. At first, everything sounded normal. I stated the time, described what I was doing, and spoke with the same calm, controlled tone I always used. For a moment, I felt a sense of relief, as if this might all have a simple explanation. Then my voice changed. It became quieter, less certain, as if something had shifted in the middle of the recording. I spoke about a feeling I didn't recognize, something that didn't belong to my usual awareness. I said it felt like I was being watched, but not from outside the room, not from anything physical or external, but from somewhere closer, somewhere inside, like something was sharing the space within my own mind. The recording ended abruptly after that, cutting off in a way that felt intentional rather than accidental. I sat there for a long time, staring at my phone, trying to reconcile what I had just heard with what I knew to be true. I had no memory of saying those words, no memory of feeling that way, and yet the evidence was undeniable. When I looked back at my notebook, the message written there felt heavier than it should have. Don't try to remember. The handwriting was mine. The words were mine. But the intent felt foreign, as if they had been written with a purpose I didn't understand. I read them over and over, searching for some hidden meaning, but the message remained simple and direct, and that simplicity made it more unsettling. Over the following days, the gaps became more frequent. Hours disappeared without warning, sometimes when I was alone, sometimes in the middle of ordinary routines. Each time, there were traces left behind, recordings, notes, small changes in my surroundings that indicated I had been active, aware, and present during those missing periods. The tone of the messages began to shift as well. At first, they sounded like me, rational and analytical, trying to understand what was happening. But gradually, something else emerged, a sense of urgency, a quiet, controlled fear that became more pronounced with each new gap. The warnings became more direct, more insistent, as if they were trying to prevent something inevitable. You need to stop. It isn't safe. You don't understand what you saw. The phrasing changed too, moving from observation to instruction, from documentation to control. It felt less like I was leaving reminders for myself, and more like one version of me was trying to manage another, guiding it away from something dangerous. I stopped sleeping properly after that. The idea of losing control for hours at a time became unbearable. I needed to see what was happening during those gaps, to confirm that it was real, to prove that I wasn't imagining it. So I set up cameras. I placed them in every room, carefully positioned to capture as much as possible. If something was happening, I would see it. If there was another version of me acting during those missing hours, I would have proof. The first time I reviewed the footage, I felt a kind of dread I couldn't explain, as if part of me already knew what I was going to find. The video began normally, with me sitting at my desk, typing. The timestamp matched my memory perfectly, and for a while, everything was exactly as it should have been. Then, without warning, I stopped moving completely. My hands froze above the keyboard, my body went still, and my eyes remained open, fixed on the screen without blinking. I stayed like that for nearly a full minute. Then I turned my head toward the camera, slowly and deliberately, in a way that didn't feel natural. The movement was too smooth, too controlled, as if it had been practiced. When I leaned closer, my face filling the frame, I could see something in my expression that didn't belong to me. I was smiling, but it wasn't a normal smile. It stretched too wide and held too long, like an imitation of something human rather than the real thing. When I spoke, my voice sounded like mine, but the tone carried a calmness that felt detached, almost amused. "You shouldn't be watching this," I said, looking directly into the camera as if I knew exactly where I would be when I saw it. I tilted my head slightly, as if listening to something I couldn't hear, and continued speaking with a level of certainty that unsettled me more than anything else. "I told you not to remember," I said. "It makes things harder to manage." The way I said it felt deliberate, controlled, like I was explaining something obvious rather than warning myself. "It started with that day," I continued, "the one you can't access." I felt my chest tighten as I listened, because I already knew what I was going to say next and I didn't want to hear it. "You think it's missing," I said, "but it isn't missing. It's contained." That word stayed with me long after the video ended. Contained. I replayed that moment over and over, focusing on the tone, the certainty, the lack of hesitation. That version of me wasn't confused or afraid. It understood exactly what had happened and why. That was when everything finally became clear in a way I couldn't ignore. The missing day wasn't an accident. It wasn't a failure of my memory. It was a decision. Something had happened during those hours, something significant enough that I had chosen to remove it completely. Not just forget it, but isolate it, contain it, and prevent it from ever being accessed again. The gaps that followed weren't random either. They were part of the same process, an ongoing effort to maintain whatever boundary had been created. I wasn't trying to recover a lost memory. I was trying to break through something I had deliberately sealed. And the more I thought about it, the more unsettling the implication became, because I know how my mind works, and I know what it would take for me to willingly create a gap in something that has always been complete. Whatever I saw on that missing day, whatever I experienced in those hours that no longer exist for me, it wasn't something minor or forgettable. It was something I believed I couldn't live with, something that forced me to choose ignorance over understanding. And somewhere within me, beyond the reach of everything I can access, there is still a version of me that remembers it perfectly, understands it completely, and is still trying in every way it can to make sure I never do, even if it means turning my own mind into something I can no longer fully trust. If this felt real, that's because it was almost real. I'll see you in the next memory.